So one of the most popular guitars I've featured on my channel is my Gibson Les Paul 1959 reissue. Many of you have favored it in my guitar comparison videos. However, several of you have asked about the tuning stability, as Gibson Les Pauls have a somewhat notorious reputation for tuning problems. So this got me wondering, is it possible for a Gibson Les Paul to come from the factory without any tuning issues? And when they do have issues, what can be done about it? And so in this video, I'll talk about why the Gibson Les Paul design is prone to tuning issues. I'll talk about some of the options that are out there to help address this issue and which ones tend to work versus not. I'll also experiment with one of these solutions and see what results we can get. I'll also do several tuning tests to see how well this Les Paul holds its tuning, and I'll compare that to a Strat as well as a Paul Reed Smith. So I'm really curious what we're going to find out, so let's dive in. So I've owned around a dozen different Les Pauls over the years, different price points from different eras, and I've certainly encountered the tuning stability issue, and it can be quite frustrating. I find that the issue tends to be most problematic on the G string, which is very prone to going out of tune when you dig in hard or do a lot of string bending. And so what is it about the Les Paul design that creates this issue? In my experience and based on my research, the primary cause is the nut. And the reason why the nut is problematic is twofold. One is the headstock angle on the Gibson Les Paul is quite dramatic. It's angled at around 17 degrees, which creates a lot of downward pressure at the nut, which creates a tendency for the string to get stuck in the nut slot. This is called binding at the nut. The second issue is the angle at which the strings fan out to the tuners from the nut. It's also a pretty sharp angle. And so what this means is that the nut work really needs to be done flawlessly to mitigate the risk of string binding at the nut. So with all that in mind, let's do our first tuning stability test with the Les Paul. So I'm going to focus on the G string here, which tends to be the most problematic. I wrote the intro music with this test in mind. You may have noticed something unusual about that part, which the entire melody is played fully on the G string, utilizing a lot of string bending, including half step, whole step, and 1.5 step bends. I tried to still keep this very musical because I think the tuning stability test needs to be put in a musical context. And so before and after each part, I'll take a readout of the G string tuning to see whether or not the tuning has drifted after I play the part. And I'll also play some chords before and after the part as well to test whether or not any tuning drift is actually detectable in the context of chordal work. So let's find out. So I was a little surprised by the results here. Every time I've been asked whether or not my Les Paul stays in tune, I'm quick to answer yes. Surprisingly, it has remarkable tuning stability. I still stand by that, even though it looks as though there is some slight drift here, and I'll explain why. And so with the tuning readout before and after, we can see that the tuning has ever so slightly drifted. Now, one thing to bear in mind when we're looking at these results is that the Peterson Strobo tuner is incredibly sensitive and accurate. So even though it looks like the tuning has drifted somewhat and gone slightly flat, I don't think that's a meaningful drift in tuning for a few reasons. Number one, I don't hear it when I'm performing or playing, either in the intro track or in the tests. And secondly, when I played the chords, I didn't really detect any intonation issues in that context either. So, is there some drift ever so slightly? Is it meaningful in the context of playing music? I would say in this case, no. But if you are experiencing tuning stability issues with your Les Paul, what are some of your options to correct that? The most important option that I would recommend is having the nut checked out. The nut might need to be replaced, it might need to be filed correctly, and I think that's going to get you the majority of the way there toward enjoying more stable tuning on your Les Paul. If the nut work checks out and everything's good there, but you're still having issues, my second recommendation would be trying some nut lubricant. Big Ben's nut sauce is a popular option, and Nomad makes a similar product as well. I'm going to test out the Nomad nut lubricant at the end of this video to see if we can mitigate that last little bit of string drift that we got on my Les Paul. So another popular guitar on my channel has been my PRS Private Stock 594. So let's test out the tuning stability of this guitar next. Paul Reed Smith Guitars has a great reputation for tuning stability, and that's not by accident, as they pay a lot of attention to details like this to provide the best playing and intonating guitar possible. And some of the design choices in the Paul Reed Smith that create a better tuning stability have to do again with the neck break angle, which is much shallower than a Les Paul. And you can also see that the way that the headstock's designed and the way that the tuners are aligned, the strings go straight back and don't break to the left or to the right. And those two design features create less binding at the nut and better tuning stability. So let's run the same tuning test with the Paul Reed Smith and see what results we get. And so I think living up to the reputation, I find the tuning stability on the Paul Reed Smith to be excellent. And I think the results demonstrated that. Looking at the before and after readout, there seems to be a little less drift after all of the string bending than we saw on the Les Paul. Again, the difference is very subtle, but I've ran these tests multiple times on both guitars and the results were consistent. So some of the other options you may read out on the internet about how to improve tuning issues, I can't speak for those directly, but the general consensus from what I've researched is that they have mixed results or they don't help at all. Some of those options are people tend to try to replace the tuners, thinking that that's the source of the issue, when in reality, the nut is the problem. Some folks try top wrapping the strings to reduce the angle over the bridge. Seems that there's mixed results with that solution. And some folks suggest stringing the guitar where you wrap the string from bottom to top of the post to reduce the break angle at the nut. Again, I haven't tested that, but you got your nut in order, you got your nut lubricated, you're still experiencing some tuning stability issues, then I would suggest trying out wrapping the string from top to bottom and or top wrapping the bridge. I would love to know, what of these solutions have you tested and what results have you gotten? So let me know in the comments below. So far, we've learned that it is possible for a Les Paul to have good tuning stability. And we've also learned that a Paul Reed Smith does seem to have even better tuning stability thanks to the shallower headstock angle, as well as the strings going straight back to the tuners rather than being fanned out like on the Les Paul. So if those two design choices have the biggest impact on tuning stability, let's see how those factors impact the tuning stability of an S-type guitar. So I have my Scott Lentz Reserve here, and like the Paul Reed Smith, the strings go straight back without any angling to the left or right like on a Les Paul. And the headstock angle is actually non-existent. It's parallel to the neck. So there's very little break angle, and the string tree minimizes some of the break angle on the upper strings. So let's see if that improves the tuning stability even further. So when we look at the before and after tuning readouts, I think the S-type guitar had the least amount of drift compared to the Paul Reed Smith and the Les Paul, where the readout was virtually identical before and after. So up next, I want to test out if we can improve the tuning stability of my Les Paul even more. So I just ran out to the local guitar center and picked up this nut lubricant by Music Nomad called Tune It. And let's go put a little bit of this on the Gibson Les Paul G-string nut slot and see if we can't mitigate some of that tuning drift we saw in the first sound demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and apply a small dab of this on the nut slot and spread it around with the little brush that comes with the kit. So easy enough. Takes less than a minute. So it seems we're still getting a tiny bit of string drift here with the added lubrication. Now, I don't think that's a reflection of the effectiveness of this particular product. It has a great reputation. What I've learned is when I was installing the lube, you may have noticed in the video, there was already some graphite installed in the nut, which I hadn't realized before. So technically, it was already lubricated. So adding additional lubrication didn't seem to have any incremental benefit. But I still think there's some learning we can take out of this test. Even though we're still measuring a tiny bit of drift with the tuner, maybe 1 to 2 cents flat, I don't think that's an issue at all as far as making music. We listen back to the pre and post readout. My ears can't hear any discernible difference in the pitch. I don't hear any rub or wonkiness. Maybe my ears aren't good enough, but let me know if you can hear something. The kind of Les Paul tuning issues that are a problem is when you're trying to tune it up and then suddenly it skips from being flat to sharp, or you get pinging in the nuts, or you go for that first string bend and then suddenly you're like a quarter or half step flat. Those are very problematic and need to be addressed. I think to recap what we've learned so far, having really good nut work is the key to tuning stability. All three of these guitars are really top tier guitars made by custom shop level luthiers. And when the nut gets the right time, attention, and expertise, it really minimizes the chances of any tuning stability issues. The good news is nut work isn't super expensive. If you just find a good tech, you can have your existing nut tweaked and or replaced to improve the tuning stability of your Les Paul, or really any guitar that you're experiencing tuning issues with. So I'm really curious if these findings align with your experience as well. If you've had trouble getting your Les Paul to stay in tune, give these a try and let me know if it helps. If you've had other things that have worked, I'd be interested to hear about that as well. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, commenting, or subscribing. That would really help get this content out to others that may enjoy it as well. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.